Welcome to the presentation on occupational asthma, working at prevention. Just to give you a little rundown as to where we're going to go for the next 20 minutes or so, I'm just going to do some introductions. What exactly is occupational asthma? Some basic respiratory anatomy, disease symptoms, the common exposures often encountered within the auto parts manufacturing industry, and also just some general preventative strategies. Who we are, well, we're a government-sponsored team made up of the Occupational Health Clinic for Ontario Workers, and we're also made up of the Industrial Accident Prevention Association. Both these groups' mission statement together is basically to promote the highest degree of mental, social, and physical well-being within the workplace for all workers. Our purpose here today specifically is to raise awareness about occupational asthma in the auto parts manufacturing industry. Why is it a concern? Well, first of all, occupational asthma has been on the rise. Some new stats I just received from 2000 to 2003 show a sharp increase in the amount of occupational asthma claims through the WSIB system. And worldwide, it's estimated that 10 to 15% of all asthma cases are work-related. And in Canada, work-related asthma is the most common occupational lung disease, accounting for over half of all reported occupational lung disease cases. Having said that, between 1993 and 2003, the WSIB has released reports that, and this is for all industries and all agents, there's been about 1,822 accepted asthma claims within the system. Now, from the IAPA source that we had and the WSIB, between 1993 and 2001, which spans an 8-year period, auto parts manufacturing had a total of 54 accepted claims, adding up to $982,000. And that, having said that, the automotive parts manufacturers were amongst the top 3 industries reporting the highest amount of claims. And that's basically our purpose here today, is because of this, we're here targeting those 3 industries and with some sort of prevention. So what is occupational asthma? Well, occupational asthma is quite similar to general asthma. It's a respiratory disease that makes your airways more hyper-responsive, and it has variable airflow obstruction. But what sets general asthma apart from occupational asthma is that with occupational asthma, it's caused by breathing in specific agents within your workplace. Inducers, irritants, specific to your workplace. What happens, the airway tissues often overreact to the dust, the vapors, gases, the fumes that are floating around within the air of the workplace. Just to give you some basic anatomy, this probably looks pretty complicated, but just to give you a better picture, I'm going to use a little analogy. This is your respiratory system, and if you just kind of imagine that your respiratory system is just like a tree, and it functions the same way as a tree does. So when you breathe in, you're feeding your tree with nutrients, which is oxygen. Now that oxygen has to come in down through the roots, make it all the way down through the trunk, eventually through the branches, to get to the leaves for them to grow. Well, this is pretty much what happens with your lungs and lung function. As you breathe air in, it has to make it all the way down through the trunk, get all the way through the branches to reach the alveoli, which are the endpoints, to do its function, which is basically oxygen exchange. The primary function of your lungs, of course, is oxygen exchange. It comes in, diffuses all the way down through the alveoli, where gas can be diffused and provide your body with oxygen. Your body needs oxygen to function, and it's very important to recognize the vital importance of the patency of these airways. Air must get through there. Now, with asthma, or while you're at work with occupational asthma, breathing in chemical agents causes various things to happen. What it does is it closes off these airways. The first thing that happens is an irritant can come in. There's a whole bunch of smooth muscle and cartilage and surrounding your bronchial airways, which are right down in here. And what happens is you'll have an irritating chemical inhaled. It'll cause these muscles to squeeze and tighten, kind of limiting and narrowing the airway. What also happens, or may happen, is that the inside lining of the tissue may become inflamed. It may set off a defensive reaction and cause tissue swelling, causing the airways to become inflamed, narrowing them even more. Now, what happens with inflammation within the body is, in general, is there's always water produced with any type of inflammation, and this is done in the bronchioles in the form of mucus, they call it, and you get an excess amount of mucus produced. So with these three things together, you get your irritant, the muscles tightening, you get your inflammation, and you get your excess mucus produced. And you can really see the internal diameter of that airway going towards where gas exchange should be prominent is really narrow. And that, in effect, is what occupational asthma does. So if you want to compare a normal branch or a normal bronchiole in that tree, you can see that an asthmatic bronchiole, when it becomes inflamed and tightened, the airway inside is quite narrow. So how do you know if you're getting occupational asthma? Well, you're going to have some difficulty breathing. You'll have some shortness of breath, chest tightness, coughing, wheezing. A lot of studies also show that one of the first signs of any type of occupational asthma is a rhinoconjunctivitis, they call it, which is a runny nose, watery eyes. Those are usually one of the first signs that have been reported in a lot of articles. So just to give you an overall pathway of what happens is you come into your place of work and you're subjected to an inducer or a trigger, and which we'll get to in a little bit, the types and chemicals that you can be exposed to. So as you inhale this inducer or this trigger, you're subjected to it. You can get airway irritation and inflammation. And this is where the real problem is that depending on the type of asthma it is, which we'll cover in just a second, your symptoms may not be apparent. But again, remember the symptoms are chest tightness, coughing, wheezing, shortness of breath. These symptoms could take anywhere from 2 weeks to 30 years, or they could be immediate, depending on the type of substance that you're exposed to. And again, in general, what is going on? The muscles in the airway tighten, your tissues swell, excess mucus is produced, and you get breathing difficulties. And again, it is quite cyclical, as it's a progressively worsening disease. Now, the two types of work-related asthma that we are talking about is, number one, we have what they consider occupational asthma. Now, with occupational asthma, you can have the allergic type. It has to do with your immune system. And of course, this is about 90% of the cases through WSIB. They are of the allergic type, meaning that you come into a workplace and you're subjected to a chemical. And over time, your symptoms it'll take a long time. Your symptoms could show up in 2 weeks. They could show up in 20 years. It takes a while for your body to become sensitized to that chemical, and that's dealing with your immune system. There's also the irritant-induced type, which is your reactive airway dysfunction syndrome they refer to. And this is usually when you're exposed to a very high level of an irritant chemical, and your symptoms will show within the first 24 hours. And they usually last anywhere from 2 weeks to 3 months, or even longer if it can be. But for the most part, most of the occupational asthma, when they're talking about occupational asthma, they're usually dealing with the allergic type, which has to do with your immune system. Now, work-related asthma also covers a work-aggravated asthma, meaning that if you have a pre-existing asthma and you go into your place of work and you're subjected to a specific chemical in your workplace that causes you these breathing difficulties, it is also covered and considered through the WSIB system as well. And it also considers the flare-up of the asymptomatic asthma, meaning that if you had a childhood asthma and it went away and you had no symptoms of it, and all of a sudden you show up in a workplace and you're getting symptoms from a chemical exposure, then they do cover that as well. But for the most part, we are dealing with the allergic asthma, which is your immune system. So it's important to know these terms in terms of dealing with your immune system. An allergen is any substance that's foreign to your body, and it can cause an adverse reaction in some people. Any foreign substance. So when we're talking about sensitization, we're talking about that allergen getting into your body. And each time it comes into your body recognizes it. And it takes less and less of that allergen to set that defensive reaction off inside your body. And again, that defensive reaction is in your airways, which is your coughing, your wheezing, chest tightness, difficulty breathing. So when you're sensitized to a chemical, I'll give you a good example. There was a woman worked in an auto parts company. She worked with isocyanates. She became sensitized to it. Sensitized to the point to where now she can't even, till this day, she still can't get into a vehicle without having a reaction because of the off-gassing of the isocyanates from the foam cushions. That's sensitization. She's very sensitive to that chemical. So what are some common asthma agents? Well, within the auto parts manufacturing industry, of course, the number one is the isocyanates, which is a designated substance within Ontario here. And it's the raw materials that all polyurethane products are made from. Your flexible rigid foams, fibers, coatings, paints, varnishes, elastomers. Also another big one is your acid anhydrides, the users of plastics. And any of the epoxy resins or adhesives will be subjected to these. Formaldehydes, a lot of mold companies have been using those in terms of, they call it purging their mold machines. Stearine, the methacrylates, the cyanacrylates. Metals and metalworking fluids are also becoming bigger, especially your cobalt, nickel, tungsten, aluminum, chromium, zinc, platinum, stainless steel. And the metalworking fluids, it's specifically it's like the fungals, the antifungals that they've been putting in there. Also the bacteria that kind of sits and kind of grows in that stuff too can be very irritating to the respiratory tract. And of course the other allergens. You have your latex, rubber, molds, fumes, colophony, your fluxes. Now, we also got some more numbers from the WSIB, and we took the top 10 causative agents, just to give you, not within the auto parts manufacturing industry, but just overall in general, just to give you a standpoint as to what. Now, it's not very specific, and that's the problem with a lot of these classification systems is people will classify things differently, and you come up with different numbers. But in any event, other and unspecified chemical products, 277 claims was number one. Now I'm assuming that there's not much known as to what the causative agent was. But for the most part, again, it's dust, paints, isocyanates, smoke, cleaning agents. And again, these are irritants and inducers.
What's the smoke? Is that secondhand?
And that's what is not clearly defined. Barry and I had discussed that, and they also had secondhand smoke down there too in that same list. And we're not sure if that was just, I believe that's just general smoke in the industrial atmosphere. I think it was under industrial gases and whatnot. But yeah, and welding fumes is becoming pretty big too. There's quite a bit of claims over the last few years, people subjected to welding fumes. So how are they exposed? Well, it's a respiratory disease, and again, it's primarily by breathing vapors, aerosols that are suspended in the air of the workplace. It's important to remember that it occurs during both the production of the sensitizing agents and the use of them within the workplace. So though they're not in direct contact by making the sensitizing chemical, they are subjected to it as they're working with it. So of the 15,000 chemicals that are used throughout the industry today, approximately 300 agents have been found to act as asthma inducers or irritants or triggers. That said, that's not a whole lot that have been found, meaning that there's a whole lot of chemicals out there that are not known. So we just want to kind of heighten the awareness. The long-term effects of many chemical agents are relatively unknown, so again, we just want that to be known. So early disease recognition is very important. Number one, because it prevents worsening of the disease. Asthma is it's a progressive disease, but if it's caught early and you can be removed from the sensitizing agent, studies have shown that your lung function gets better. So I guess in effect, you can reverse the course of occupational asthma if you recognize it early and you get removed from that environment. So in recognizing occupational asthma, again, you just want to, this is a good screening tool for you to go through. You want to ask yourself the following questions. Do you have these symptoms, first of all? You're coughing, you're wheezing, chest tightness, shortness of breath. Then you want to start correlating them with your place of work. Did they first show once you began employment here? Did the symptoms worsen as the workday progresses? Did the symptoms improve on holidays or time away from work? So you just want to kind of put 2 and 2 together and recognize your symptoms with the atmosphere at work. But keep in mind that some of the symptoms can be delayed. In some instances, they can be delayed, meaning that if you go to work, no problems at work, and you come home and 4 hours later you start getting chest tightness, shortness of breath, coughing, wheezing. This is a delayed type of reaction, and it does happen. So we also want you to be aware of that. So the main thing is that if you have any of these symptoms, you want to make an appointment, you want to see your family physician and have a physical exam. You want to tell your doctor where you work, what your job is, and the substances you use. Another good resource is also the professionals here at the Occupational Health Clinic for Ontario Workers. Again, you can come in here, make an appointment to see the proper physician, nurse, and they'll help you with your diagnosis. Now, the goal, I guess, would be, before it gets to any of this, is we want to prevent occupational asthma, of course. So we do this in kind of a general preventative step way, because there's so many auto parts manufacturing companies out there that that's the only way that we could do this, because we couldn't get really specific with a lot of different companies. So the next step, I guess, you'd want to do is you'd want to prevent it along the path. You want to prevent the agent from the source to the worker. And you can do this, again, through exposure controls, engineering closed systems, ventilation, exhaust systems designed to capture and vent the vapors in the outside place. Again, that's engineering. You can also do a process isolation where you have employee restricted areas where only the workers that are working on that one job go there, or a confined area for the work itself. And the last thing you'd want to do, which is your last line of defense, is you want to provide and use protective clothing and equipment. And for the most part, we're mostly talking about respiratory equipment when we're talking about occupational asthma. Here are your different types of respiration. You got your particulate mask up here, your cartridges, your power filtered air mask, and your scubas, your self-contained breathing apparatus. What this is here is a good website right on the bottom. And if you type into this website, you can go right to this website, you can type in what chemicals you're exposed to within your workplace, and it will give you the proper mask to wear, the proper cartridge, and how to protect yourself. That's actually a great resource. In terms of primary prevention, what we can do also is all workplaces should offer, and all workers should participate in workplace training and education. And this can be done through the WHMIS programs by having all your material safety data sheets on hand, having worker education programs, let the workers know what they're working with, of course, and how to prevent occupational illness from working with what they are working with. And also hosting awareness programs such as these, just to kind of keep on top of things. Secondary prevention, to prevent occupational asthma, what else we could do? Well, we could provide medical surveillance programs. And this has been done with any designated substance in Ontario. I know with isocyanides, they have medical surveillance programs, and it's by law that they have to have them. They'll come in, and what they'll do is they'll take pulmonary function tests, they'll do medical histories, questionnaires, and they'll do this on probably a yearly or a bi-yearly basis, just to kind of track your health functions when you're working with a known respiratory irritant or asthma-causing agent. And this is what they do. And this is what has been suggested. If there are any known asthma agents within your place of employment, of the 300 that are out there, this would be a good secondary type of prevention. We could also incorporate exposure monitoring programs and enforce them. And this is done just to determine compliance with standards. You want to identify your hazardous areas in your workplace. You want to measure the appropriate exposure levels. And you could also develop exposure profiles on each worker. When you're identifying hazardous areas, you're kind of labeling what that limit is at, and you're profiling it, who was working there, and putting it on their profile, what they're subjected to in that, say, that 8-hour time period for that day. And again, you just keep these exposure profiles on record, and in the end, I think that's going to help everybody determine cause and effect in terms of occupational asthma, but also in terms of prevention. It's huge. Okay, and I guess for tertiary prevention, employees that get occupational asthma, of course, there's also the employee accommodations, which 9 times out of 10 has been successful. A lot of people, what they do is they just they change their jobs or change the environment where they're working at. I guess the last thing that would be available too would be job retraining through the WSIB system, which they have had in the past. Okay. We also have to cover the Health and Safety Act, Ontario's Health and Safety Act, which specifically outlines employer responsibilities, the worker responsibilities, and safety regulations specific for each industry. So again, as an employer, you want to, of course, follow the Health and Safety Act in Ontario. You also are responsible to inform workers of the occupational health and safety policies in the workplace. But not only inform them, you also have to enforce them as well. You should reduce the level of hazardous agents and monitor them regularly. And this comes in, I believe they call it due diligence, or that is their obligation to do so. They should supply and maintain personal protective equipment, offer information and training on the hazards in the workplace, and they should also enforce the use of proper protective equipment, personal protective equipment. Worker responsibilities, of course, they have the obligation or the responsibility to work safely in a way that protects their health. They should participate in all training and educational programs offered by their employers. They should wear all personal protective equipment that the job requires, and always follow the standard operating procedures set out by the employer, the Health and Safety Committee, the Industry Safe Work Association, etc. They want to cooperate with medical surveillance programs, which it's kind of baffling. In a few of the presentations that I've previously done, there were people with isocyanites, and they were also on the medical surveillance program, and there were employees that were not obligated to go under it. It is voluntary, and they declined to get medically monitored. So I guess in terms of prevention, it's not an obligation to go through the medical programs, or the medical surveillance programs, but you should as a worker. But most importantly, if you find any problems, you definitely want to report it to the appropriate personnel. Okay, in terms of general hygiene, and we are referring to sensitization, so we're referring to an allergen. Anything that's out there and can get in here, we want to prevent that from happening. So in terms of general hygiene, we just want to reiterate that you should always wash your hands before and after eating, drinking, smoking, using the washroom. Because again, we are dealing with something foreign getting into your body and creating a sensitization type reaction. Again, we don't want you to eat at your workstations. Another good point is to keep your work clothes at work and separate from your home. Just in general, think safety first. We want to prevent whatever's out there from getting in here. So in making your workplace healthier, we just want you to be aware that chemical exposures in your workplace can cause you health problems. We also want to note that education and training are the keys to working safely in your work environment. And we also just want to reiterate that it's a joint cooperation to kind of prevent occupational asthma within your workplace. It's both the employer and the worker should work together to prevent this. So our take-home message is we just want you to be aware, be active. We want you to ask questions when you don't know. We want you to provide suggestions when you do know. And just cooperate and come to some sort of preventative agreement, I guess, to prevent occupational asthma. But most importantly, if you recognize any of the symptoms of occupational asthma, which is your coughing, wheezing, chest tightness, shortness of breath, we want you to go see your doctor.